Welcome to the Workology podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for a 45-minute in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, here's your host, Jessica, with this episode of Workology.
The HR and recruiting technology landscape is a busy one these days, and you probably know that from the emails that are dropping in your email box for free demo requests and iPads. In January, we've had a number of notable fundings for emerging HR technology companies, including Glassdoor, TinyPulse, and Eploy. Chances are that you, as a human capital leader, are adding a new HR technology and/or services to your existing HR recruiting department. Once the sales process happens and you sign on the dotted line, the customer and vendor relationship really begins. And usually, only then do we start thinking about the expectations between these two parties. If we are in a relationship, we should be thinking about expectations, dreams, and aspirations. Essentially, how do you grow with your vendor? How do you guys grow old together? That's what we're here to talk about today. My name's Jessica Miller-Merrill, and I want to welcome you to the Workology podcast. It's great to have you on our podcast as part of Blogging for Jobs. Today's guest is William Tincup. He's one of the funniest and smartest people in the human capital space. William has insights and that he's been a vendor, having co-founded the Star Conspiracy marketing firm, and since his departure, has focused his time on being within the HR community. So, William, welcome to the Workology podcast.
Jess, thanks for having me on. I absolutely love talking with you. So this is not work. I'm actually using this as a break from the other work that I'm doing. So just thanks for having me on. I can't wait to talk with you about the vendor practitioner relationship.
I think it'll be a fun one, and probably one that isn't talked about enough, certainly, with research to back it versus content marketing jargon and such.
Let's try that.
Yeah.
Let's see what goes on there.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. Tell us more about you for those that might not be familiar with William. I don't know who wouldn't be, but I'm sure there's one or two out there.
What have you been living under? No, I'm just kidding. I think that I would probably start off by saying that I've been a marketer for a long time, and that's kind of how I came up and came to both fall in love with HR and to fall in love with the ecosystem that serves HR. So the suppliers, the vendors, if you will. I came up through marketing and absolutely did it for a decade. Loved marketing and kind of being a marketing consultant is a lot of fun. I really thought, and this was a mistake, but I'll just tell you kind of how I got there. I thought consulting was different. So I thought marketing and running an agency and kind of doing that bit was one thing, but somehow consulting was different. And in my mind, further illustrating the fail, I thought it was on a higher plane. I thought vendors and practitioners thought higher of consultants than they did of marketing folks. And the truth is they don't. As a consultant, you're a prostitute. I mean, it's just you kind of get to this emotional level where you kind of get comfortable with that, and no one really likes prostitution, but it's been around, turns out, for thousands of years. And consultants, by their very nature, you're whoring out what you know, your experience, your brain, your intelligence, all of that stuff that makes you you. You're completely prostituting that stuff, and it's true of prostitution that you don't pay for a prostitute to come to you. You pay for a prostitute to leave. And that's true of consulting. And it's a learn that it took me 4 years to figure that out. But the truth is they want you to come in, add value, give everything that you can, and then they want to give you money to leave because then they want to sort it out without you. And once you realize that as a consultant, that really they're not paying for me to show up, they're not paying for my contribution and expertise, they're paying for all that stuff bundled up and then for me to leave. During that time when I was a consultant, the industry treated me like an analyst. And this is that weird part of being a blogger, being a speaker, being a consultant. You get thrown into a lot of different categories. But the industry treated me like an analyst. And I had dug my heels in for years that I didn't want to be an analyst. And as John Sumser and I were working together more and more consulting, we started doing more and more research. But it was behind the veil at vendor A, vendor B, vendor X. And so we do customer research, we do competitive intel research. We start doing all this research. So really, it's negligible that we're actually acting like analysts. We're behaving like analysts. And as much as I didn't like that, that was what the market wanted out of me. So at one point it wanted me to be a marketer, and at one point it wanted me to be a consultant. And on the third time at bat, it wants me and it desires me. The market desires me as an analyst. It wants me to use my brain to look at things and report back what I found. So John and I pivoted last year and still have the consulting stuff that we still do on occasion. But really, with the launch of Key Interval at HR Tech, we really said, no, you know what? We're going to create a research agenda. We're going to go out and research what really happens with practitioners and technology. And we're going to go and try and make sense of that because a lot of the analysts, they make sense of the vendor landscape. They didn't do a lot of, like, I would tell you that two things happen as of HR Tech. Every analyst in our space reached out to John and I and said, congratulations, if there's anything we can do, we want to be helpful, etc. Like, I thought it was going to be a competitive deal, not so much. Very, very, very helpful community. And secondly, a lot of them are doing good work as it relates to the vendor landscape. So if you're looking for a global ATS or a global LMS or something like that, Brendan Hall, Constellation, Aberdeen, Gartner, Forrester, all these cats, they've done that work. They're doing that work, and it's great. Like if you're trying to make sense of the 800 ATSs to get down to the 40, to get down to the 5 that you should shortlist, they do that work really well. John and I don't want to do that work. We want to actually be on the practitioner side and only talk to practitioners and really only interact with them as it relates to technology. So like what are they doing and how do they interact? So when you look at our research calendar, it's extremely practitioner centric because that's what we wanted to do from a research scheme. We wanted to go and just talk with practitioners. So that's a little bit about me.
I love the practitioner focus because as a former practitioner, it's you don't get a lot of love, right? I mean, we get emails and we get research reports that tell us what we should be doing and what best in class companies do, but maybe I'm not a best in class organization, which is there's many of us out there, myself included in that. I didn't always work for a best in class company, but what am I doing that is maybe unique or interesting or a best practice? So we can share with others and learn. I think it's great.
Cool.
Well, as I mentioned, today's topic is about how vendors and HR can work together. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we're kind of all in this together. Like you were saying, William, that services are being provided in the ecosystem to help us do our jobs better. But what really is important is understanding maybe what kind of job HR actually does. I think there's a lot of miscommunication and misconceptions, even amongst the thought leaders, the analysts, the vendors, about what practitioners do and don't do and what they know and what they don't know. But why is this important? Why is this topic important for you?
Well, I start at the kernel is curiosity. Like I'm curious as to how this works, and I think as you look at ideal vendor relationship, I think John and I going into this, we said, well, if it's an app and they get an app off the iTunes, and that app is helping them get employee engagement, or the app's doing performance reviews or something like that. Well, what's that relationship? What should it be? What is that relationship with vendors? The vendor of that app, the people that created that, how should I interact with them? And if you take that line of thinking all the way to the Fortune 10, Fortune 100, and you've got, let's say a deep SAP, involvement where, people are spending, let's say $40 million on SAP, well, that relationship's probably different. It's probably different than the one for the app. But okay, well, most of the world isn't in those two categories. It's somewhere in the middle. So we started with curiosities, and I wanted to know how they actually work together. When the echo chamber isn't watching, what really happens with these two groups? And I want to understand the relationship and how how it helps us with our own expectations and limitations. So really the goal there is to go out and survey, 1,000 people, do a bunch of qualitative interviews, and to find out how is it really? How is it really? Not how do I believe it is, or how the echo chamber believes it is, but how is it really?
Interesting. Wow, it's that's hard to scale. Just, I mean, that's a lot of work. You have
Mhm.
your research, and then you have your interviews. It's time consuming, but much needed.
Well, you gotta. First of all, great question. Having just quantifiable data is good, and again, I'm no value judgment, but a lot of people in our space will do, I think, great work with the responses that they get. So this is the political way of saying that if you get 30 responses and then you can draw from that and make conclusions, or 100 responses, or 150 responses and draw conclusions. First of all, that's fantastic. John and I want to have a threshold of 1,000. So we've set our bar internally. We set our bar much higher, which means you have to do more social, you have to do more email, you have to interact with a lot of different panels. To get the responses, you got to go and do a lot more work. Um, but to only do quantifiable results, we think we miss some of the stories. So what we do is if you think about this like a TV show, we kind of archetype what we believe some of the conversation points are. We go out and ask a bunch of questions. We come back with some of that data and the initial data, and then we form some other ideas of actually what's going on, and then we go and have 40 conversations with people that aren't really about the survey, but are about, here's some of the things that we're seeing. Tell us, is that true? What do you believe? What do you see? What appears in the review mirror there? We believe it's the balance. You got to have both. You've got to have the quantifiable to just even show up at the party, but the qualitative interviews, I think, is where I think that's where we get the data to round out.
So let's start talking about this relationship.
Sure.
What are some best ways that you guys have found in the research for both parties, the service or the vendor and the HR folks, to be able to work together? And then what do HR folks want in their relationship with their vendor?
So on the first part, I had it pegged that user adoption or change management or training was the most important things that HR pros wanted out of their vendors. At the end of the day, they want to help me manage my change, train the heck out of people, and make sure we get this software adoption. And a lot of that was my own bias because I came to the table with 4 years of user adoption, consulting. So I came to the table completely biased, and I learned very quickly and very swiftly that the number one thing pros want out of vendors is they want communications. They believe communications trumps everything else. So they want help. They want to make sure that everyone understands the technology changes that is happening, but they want to be excellent, bar none. They want to be excellent at communicating that change. Completely threw me. Had no idea that that's what they really wanted out of vendors is, and a partner, a collaborator to help them communicate. Second thing I would say is that users, the kind of the most important measure of success is user satisfaction. So let me kind of get into that. That I've talked for forever until people are blue in the face about user adoption. That's consumption, usage, and adoption. And they've taken that further. HR pros care more about user satisfaction, not adoption, mind you. This is to, are you happy? How did you feel? What did you like? What do you believe? It's soft, but they've prioritized that as number one. Like when they look at the success of an engagement, success of a project, they're looking, are my people happy in the software? Which is not something on anyone's radar. Like if you go and Google user satisfaction HCM, it doesn't exist. No one's talking about it. It's not out there, and which means that vendors aren't talking about it. So there's a huge there's a huge misconception that the vendors they just don't even think that it's something that warrants them to pay attention to. So again, as we shore those things up over the coming years, if it's really important, we're going to get really analytical about it, which is great. But at the end of the day, it's vendors that get in there and say, not only do your people use the software, they're happy. We've made their life better. And so that's the second one, is user satisfaction. And the last one's around training, and it's kind of came to this crescendo in our research that the unbundling training is a recipe for failure. And this is a common mistake that vendors make, is that they take training of their application and they make it a separate line item, and that by unbundling it, you've actually made your implementation, you've made your relationship, you put it in harm's way. If you bundle that into the price, so that they pay a little bit more for their license, but they get training, you're going to have a successful implementation. You're going to have a good relationship. Ultimately, you're probably going to get to those user satisfaction limits that you want to get to. But the unbundling is just, it's a pathway to failure.
A business is only as good as the customers it serves, and while there's a lot of money flowing in the HR technology industry to build a product, it's nothing without proper customer onboarding and support, which is what you've been talking a lot about. Vendors need to increasingly work towards understanding the customer's needs, and I think you guys with this research are really helping maybe drive that point home. It's just not about a sort of content topic or buzzword for Q1 where we're building content for these things. We're focused on talking to our customers and really providing them the support, the experience, the usability, so that they can properly integrate and use the product within their organization. This can be an extremely challenging thing in B2B, which is where we sit, business to business and HR and recruitment. How do these two parties, they're both important but separate, work together? How do we make the marriage work?
So it's all the relationship. This is again, I came into this, and I'm going to be unpacking my biases for about a decade. It's like yet more biases that I'm like, oh, I gotta lose that one. And it's all the relationship. It's focusing on the relationship. So the two reasons you get fired as a vendor, and they're pretty equal at this point, is bad software and bad relationship. So, if your software is terrible, but your relationship is good, you can stay in there a little bit longer, and you can kind of get the software to a certain point. But you can't recover from a bad relationship. They do not renew contracts with a vendor whom they've had a bad relationship with. That's the game. And so what we did not know prior to the research is, we didn't think that HR really liked those relationships. And a lot of this is just the echo chamber and its vendors probably talking negatively. But HR absolutely loves their vendor partners. They love them. And we've seen it. You and I have seen this with people like at TMP or Monster or Career Builder. When those people leave and they get a new gig, they take their team with them. Like that TMP team that worked with them on this, usually they go on and they move over to the new account because they like their team. Well, we see that in the services side, but I think I had always thought of in the technology that HR put up this big giant wall between the two, and they didn't really like the people that they had to interact with. Furthest from the truth. They absolutely love their vendor partners. They love the relationship they have with them. It's much better than we had ever thought. And the only reason you get fired, the good news for a vendor, is the only reason you get fired is if your software is crap, or if you're terrible at relationships. And if your software's crap, you should probably work on that. Just FYI. And if your relationships are crap, that comes down to people, it comes down to training. It's all fixable. All that stuff on the relationship is all fixable, but it's all focusing on the relationship. That's how we get better. And I think, take examples like ADP years ago, they got all their salespeople and their implementation people went through the PHR training. Whether or not they could get the PHR or not, that's not the point. They all went through that training so that they could be more empathetic to what was really going on in HR. Like more of that stuff where we learn and get better at the relationship, the better. If I,
I think that HR people just want to be, I mean, I'm making an assumption here, want to be understood. And if my vendor went through PHR courses, I would be blown away.
hmm
I would be blown away that they took the time, that they cared enough to do it. Because oftentimes when I'm trying to be sold to, I get the cold calls, or I get the cupcakes, or maybe if I'm at a conference, they take me to dinner. So there's all this, but really what really matters, I mean, you want a good product, you want a good technology behind you, but do I like the people that I'm going to be interfacing with that are building this technology?
Yeah, that's I mean that's what the research is suggesting as well, Jess, is that they buy from people they like. That's what we got to start there, because you buy from people you like, and then you want that implementation people to be just as likable, and you want them to have your back, and you're going to have their back. And at the end of the day, the vendors that get fired for cause. It's not like that someone woke up one day and said, "Oh, I don't like my payroll provider." It's for cause. And that for cause has two veins, and the veins are either is the software was crap, it was poor, it didn't work, etc. Or the people just didn't focus on the relationship. They didn't respond to email, they didn't answer calls, they stopped showing up, they stopped caring. And I think if we fix those two things on the vendor side of things, and you have decent software and you care about the relationship, I think it's nothing but growth on the vendor side. Like there's nothing that really disables your growth other than bad software and bad relationships.
This is a sidebar question, but I'm starting to see with some of these emerging technology companies that they are bringing in like a customer success person
Hmm.
who has the customer success person has a background as a recruiting or HR practitioner.
It's a genius move. One of the first groups of people that I saw do this was Silk Road. Years ago, they hired HR pros. So they hired SBHRs, they hired people that have been working in a desk in a non-sales role. So there's the salesperson, and that has some technical expertise, sales expertise, and then you'd have the HR person, and they'd go to meetings together, they'd get in a room together, and that person could always look at the practitioner and say, "Here's why I bought. Here's why I believe in them, and here's why I'm working at Silk Road, because I believe in them so much. And I'll answer all your questions." And I'll put all of your issues to bed. I'll take care of everything because I've lived your nightmare. I've lived your day to day. I've lived, the ups and downs of HR. Ask away. And I love that movement. And I think it's just smart because it's relating. You have the salesperson doing the salesperson things. Like they've got to do the follow up. They've got to get the proposal in the hand. They've got to do all that stuff. They've got to say no. They've got to take on hard issues. Like the salesperson's perfect for all that, but the relatedness and being able to kind of have that empathy and walk in that person's shoes, I just think it's smart. Like more vendors doing that, great.
Can I pay to send a copy of your report to HRCI?
I went through my my
Sorry.
no, I went through my research and got everything done and everything with for everything with Sherm. I'm gonna go do the Sherm bit. I don't know if you've already done that yet, but I am gonna go and move my certification over and kind of go through that process because I want to be supportive of both. And in a world where both of them were out there doing their bit, I was very supportive of both Sherm and HRCI. But I think the future of that's going to be, I don't know how you believe on this, but I think the future of that's going to be really with Sherm.
I I'm an approved provider, or the blog is, in my business, and for HRCI. So I'm extremely supportive of them, and I'm certified. Started, I think my earliest certification was 2003 for my PHR. Um, However, as an approved provider, the user experience, I've seen both as somebody who's submitting sessions for approval and getting rejected, like when you submit something for strategic or whatever, but then also trying to have to recertify and go into the system and use it yourself. So I attempted at getting my SHRM certification and had a error. So I am my plan is to get everything finished, but I've went through the course. I just don't have my fancy certificate yet.
Well, you're a step ahead of me as always, because you have at least started that process. I don't plan to start it until the summer. I'll
Well,
catch up. I'll
yeah,
catch up. Like everything else, Jess. I'll catch up.
yeah, and you'll do fine. You'll do fine. And I always admired you because not very many folks who've come from the service side or the vendor side have taken the time to go get the certification. And as well as a lot of the listeners that are certified, that test is crazy hard.
Hardest test I've ever taken.
Oh my gosh.
It's usually how I start off most of my speeches is that I would say the same thing. It's like, listen, I was in college for 8 years and 3 degrees, and it was the hardest test I've ever taken in my life, and that's why I'll keep the cert live because I don't want to ever have to take the test again.
No,
I
I'm
don't.
thankful that I'm grandfathered in to the SHRM side because I don't want to have to study for that sucker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm very comfortable with that.
I'm accepting the gift and not complaining. Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. Today's topic is how HR and vendors can work together with my guest, William Tincup. You can connect with William on the Twitters at William Tincup. It's pretty simple. He's all over the Twitters and many other places. I've mentioned a bit about HR technologies, but your study wasn't limited only to HR tech. It covers all vendors, including consultants, staffing firms, and RPOs. Did you find any interesting notes or points between those services?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is you have different expectations of an RPO or a service provider. A service provider, they're not. It's less about the technologies that they use, so they're a little bit more ambivalent. Like you take an average RPO, they're interacting with anywhere between 5 and 20 ATSs. So their technical acumen is pretty high. They can make those systems, whatever systems that you have, they can make them shine. They're better at relationships, and that's something that the study is kind of coming about is that service providers turns out they know how to give good service, and so they're more intuitive and they're more anticipatory around your needs, like because they've built up the muscle memory to understand you're here, but you're going to be over here in about 2 weeks. Let's get in front of that. And so the software folks are behind them because they're in their software. And so they're experts at their software, not necessarily the 20 other programs that HR is kind of having to deal with. And they're not as good about being intuitive, like an intuitive partner. And I think that's where the big rift, and it makes sense. It shakes out common sense was is that service providers, they've been doing it longer, they're better at it, and that's also why there's less churn in their deals. There's less churn with a service provider as there is with a software vendor.
Let's talk a little bit about CABs or customer advisory boards. You guys mentioned this a little bit as I was doing my own research about your guys' research. I was researching your research actually, and you mentioned CABs. Can you talk a
Sure.
little bit about those?
Customer advisory board, at a certain point, there's a lot of different reasons for why people get into them. Some of it's ego, some of it's status, um, but it's an evolution. It's an evolutionary type thing to where we have a relationship. At the beginning of that relationship, I care more about you doing exactly what I need. At one point with a customer advisory board, you've crossed over into caring about that company. And so you've crossed over into I want to care about your product, I want to care about your team, I want to care about your success. If this company is going to go public, I want to care about that, etc. And then the most important note there is that a lot of people get involved with customer advisory boards, CABs, to ensure that their company is represented in the vendor development plans. So this came out like 86%. That the reason that CHROs and VPs of HR get involved with CABs is they want to make sure that their stuff is protected, that what they care about is represented in the development plan, in the roadmap.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're really looking maybe for some additional features or new pieces to the existing kind of product or suite of services, the advisory board's the best place to be.
Right? Because you're there and they're asking your opinion, they're getting your take. That's going to inform the other folks on the CAB as well as product. And that's where the best kind of CABs, they sync up with the roadmap. What is the product roadmap currently? And what are people telling them that they need to add? And they use the CABs as kind of a reflection, a sounding board for those things. Well, people are telling us we should be developing X, Y, and Z, and the CABs, depending on their interest, the CABs either kill those things or support those initiatives. And so, yeah, it completely makes sense.
Yeah, because blogging about the product on your personal blog, I think it would be so much more effective to just talk to your representative or your company, the CHRO on the CAB.
Right. I'll tell you two other things that I think that were really interesting is a lot of people mention Google as their support, which again, I think I could get there, but I didn't expect it. And so, one of the things John and we hold each other to is there's just a bunch of myths and anecdotes and facts running around in the market. And it's okay to be surprised. But when people I get my support from Google, that popped up about 80%. So what's really interesting on the software side of things is that they're going out to Google to figure out their support. They're going out to YouTube. They're going outside of the normal beaten process. They're going outside of that for support. Second part of that, which was really compelling, is they're willing to pay for premium support. So if a vendor comes to them and says, "Hey, here's the deal. Most of our support, we have great YouTube channel, we have great this, that, and the other. Most of the stuff you're going to be able to kind of fix your way through. However, if you want us to, this is the luxury car buying experience, right? If you really want us to do all kinds of other things and really have a premium support layer, which is all people, time and materials, it's extra, noted, and if it's extra, most HR pros will buy it. They'll buy it if it's truly premium support. The line there is they won't buy regular support at a premium price. But if you're going to give them premium support as a vendor, they'll buy it.
It makes sense to me. I'm a fan, although I wasn't in the beginning, but of Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Work Week. And
Hmm.
I feel like aside from Tim finding like scapegoats and loopholes to break rules, the message in his book is to just work smarter,
Hmm.
right? You only have 24 hours in the day or whatever your work day is. So you can work smarter and make the most of your time by utilizing premium services.
That's exactly right. And at the end of the day, you want to have a great relationship. They're willing to buy it if you're willing to provide it. But it's got to be really premium. You got to really be a premium provider. But both those combined just threw me. Like it took me a day to recover from learning that most of the support that goes on in our space is done via Google. Again, lines up common sense wise, but I just didn't expect that, and I didn't expect them to be willing to pay for premium support. That both of them kind of threw me. But anyhow, I wanted to make sure that I talked to you about those two.
Yeah, the Google thing doesn't surprise me that much just because we do a reader survey every year for the blog, and so consistently over the last 3 or 4 years it has been I get my information from Google,
Hmm.
which is one of the reasons why I keep blogging. People say, why after 7 years do you blog so much and why do you keep writing about stuff? Is because people are looking for that information.
Yeah.
So it's out there. So yeah, they are using Google or their friends, but mostly Google. Do you have any vendor HR relationship success stories from your research that you can share?
There are so many. I mean, seriously, the good part of this is being able to talk to people and find out their bit and their story. You uncover that there's a lot of good things going on in HR. It is as a cynic and pessimist, it's actually it's hard for me to contend with, but there are really cool things going on in HR. I think the one that struck a nerve with me, it was at Ceridian's user conference last year. It was Guitar Center and Ceridian and things that you just wouldn't expect. I mean, here's Guitar Center, a retail outlet, and what they were digging into is the time and attendance data to really uh, draw that into scheduling and performance. And then performance into incentives. So take time and attendance data and real just kind of your hard boiled time and attendance data. When are people clocking in, clocking out? And look at that based on what should the optimal schedule look like. And then when we say optimal, that's not just coverage. who should be the best players, who's performing. We got Jimmy and Jane. Jane's fantastic. Sales go up. Jimmy's just there, with a pulse, breathing air, taking bong hits. One of them's better. Both of them get you coverage, but one of them's a better performer. And if they're a better performer, what are we doing to then take care of them and highlight that they're doing a great job? So it's connecting all those dots. Like, that's what I love. I'm not beaten with big data. I could easily be the guy that's just beaten with make a big data drinking game. And every time, someone says it, this, that, and the other. But truth is, it's the little data. It's connecting little things like these guys connected time and attendance to scheduling, scheduling to performance, performance to incentives. You know what? Did they solve world poverty? No, but it's still pretty cool because now Guitar Centers run in such a way where they have optimal schedules. Like that, when you walk into a Guitar Center, they're all run the same way. They have optimal schedules, and those people there are their best people at that particular moment, and they're being incentivized. And I think that's cool. But there's you run into the same stories, but there's thousands of these to pick from.
And I love the little stories like this, right? Because as you're saying, like it doesn't have to be like little is the new big.
Truth.
And these are everyday stories that everyday people, regardless of how large or small their company they're in, they're experiencing.
Yeah, there's more reason to have hope because there's more good work happening in HR than not. And it's counter to our fascination, in the echo chamber of how everything's negative. It's not that bad. It's actually a lot of really cool people and really cool stories over there if we allow ourselves to to hear the positive stories rather than to just be attracted to the negative stuff.
I feel like I'm going to only write positive blog posts for the next month and see if I can continue that because I mean, for me, I would rather fill my life with positivity versus negativity, and I think that most people are drained by the negativity side. I mean, that's why I don't turn on the news.
Yeah, same bit. Same bit. I refuse to watch the news because I already know what's there. There's murders, there's car accidents, there's jihad. It's okay, I get it. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. Totally get it. That's a Merle Haggard song. Totally understand. That's the news. I got no interest. I got no interest because I don't want to give that power. I choose not to give that power. I've made the mistake of being overtly negative about HR and recruiting in the last decade. And what I'm slowly coming to grips with is that I was wrong, that there are actually good people there doing good work. And I chose to focus on the negative.
Well, I'm proud of you, and I think you're a smart and even a bigger man for a person for being willing to say like, look, I was wrong, I learned, and now I'm ready to work in research and help further the industry. It's
Just
exciting.
I should have moved to research a decade ago. That's what I've learned. And we're early in. I mean, it's our first survey, and we're doing our second one now on implementations. And, it's early, and I'm sure all the other analysts and researchers out there are like, okay, new car smell, totally get it. But I should have made the move to research a decade ago because I've always liked the way that Josh Bersin and Ray Wang talk. Like when you hear them talk, they always start off their answers in very similar ways. Like, we've looked at that, we've researched that, we've talked to people about that. And here's what we learned. They're not really passing their thoughts off. They're not really trying to say, I'm Josh Burson, I'm the smartest guy in the room, and here's the things that you should know. Most of it is, I'm a mirror. I went out and asked a bunch of people. I talked to a bunch of folks, and here's what I learned about what they're doing. And I've always respected that language. Like I've always kind of respected the way that they go about their business. I just I couldn't see doing it, and now it's closer to me. So now I can absolutely see it. I want to talk like that. I want to get in front of an audience and not say, well, this is what William believes about the world. This is William's take on what practitioners have told him. And so letting people know that, hey, listen, let me show you some slides. Let's talk about it. Here's my take, but here's the take. Here's what we saw. Here's what we feel is going on. So should have done it a decade ago.
Well, you're here now, and where can people go to pick up this new copy of research with about the HR and vendor relationship, or any future research?
Sure. Key interval. key intervals, the two most important parts of a map, the key and the interval. And it's key interval research, but the domain is just keyinterval.com. And you'll see John and I's, mugs and all of our stuff there. But we're early on and it's going to be a fun ride. I like working with John a lot. And I think the research is actually going to be helpful to people.
It sounds like it. I'm excited to see what you guys are going to do and where you're going to go with this.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. I mean, I feel like we just basically caught up.
This is the after show of the early show.
We could have pushed play on the early show. I mean,
Yeah, we could have.
we could have. That's the best podcast for me. Is like, you're partly you're catching up and you're kind of getting what's going on in their world. But thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you being here on the Workology podcast, and thanks to the listeners. I hope that William was able to drop some knowledge bombs on you, and certainly check out the new research site and a lot of what he's doing. I'm Jessica Miller-Merrill, and this is the Workology podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, HR and recruitment. Until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all past episodes of the podcast. Thanks so much.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by Total Picture Media.